Can you guys hear me? Good. Sometimes the microphone's not working quite. So tonight we are discussing our December read, The Seventh Veil of Salome, about the princess and the actresses and all that great stuff. Hold, here comes some more folks. Hold on. Okay. Um, And as I said, we don't have the author tonight. I attempted to get Sylvie Moreno Garcia to join us on numerous occasions and never got a reply back. Hope I'm never that bad. It's kind of sad. I mean, I tried her agent and otherwise, but unfortunately, it's just us gals and guys on the phone tonight discussing this book. I've read this. It's been a long while since I read it. I read it when it first came out because I was considering it for October. And so, and I haven't had a chance today to sort of study to kind of, get myself back into it. So if I forget facts, that's only because it's been a while. I don't know if you guys, I'm not one of these, I read a book and I remember it forever. I just sort of, it kind of fades into the background of all the other thousands of things I read. So I may need some help remember characters' names because it's a little remiss. But one of the reasons I really enjoyed this, or I picked this book, was because of the symbolism was so strong, the parallels between the ancient biblical story, which really isn't given a whole lot of credence in the book of Matthew. I mean, in terms of a big, long narrative about it. But there's been a lot of film and a lot of literature on the topic. And of course, this book was set in the 50s in Hollywood, where we have that sort of juxtaposition between these two actresses who, in my mind, together represent the biblical character of Salome. And the parallels between some of the decisions that they all have to make and the worlds in which they were entrenched in, and of course the tragic outcome in the end. And so, from that perspective, I'd like to get some sort of feedback from you guys in terms of what you felt was compelling about the book, and what you didn't. I will admit, in my mind too, it started off a bit slow, and I was a bit thrown when I first started reading it about some of these first person accounts, sort of in some sort of present day, I guess, or 90s sort of conversation of, screenwriters or an assistant to Nielsen or whomever it might have been, that sort of threw me off in terms of I wasn't quite sure where it was going. But then, of course, the parallels became pretty obvious. And, one of the two stories in my mind sort of surpassed the other. And I want to get y'all's opinion on that. If you were more sucked into the Hollywood story or more into the first century story. And I will give you my opinion when we get there. But just sort of get some feedback on, both how the author paralleled these two stories, some of that symbolism and some of that, that sort of, how do I describe it? Taking an ancient story and making it still relevant to today. And then, of course, or relative to today or relative to the times in the 50s. And then, of course, we'll talk about writing style and how she approached the topic. So, do I have anybody that has any comments they want to offer first on thoughts and impressions about how those two narratives played out in this story? Eileen, I see you down there, your hand up.
Yeah, I really like the first century story much better than the 50s story.
Me
And
too.
and I was kind
There
of
you go.
disappointed every time it switched back to the 1950s. I was like, "Oh God," like, "Oh geez." I
Could
wanted
you
to go
find could you
back.
find yourself sort of skipping through some of it because I didn't like the Nancy character at all. Of course, probably y'all didn't either. And I didn't like the over sexualization that the way she was presented that way. And so I found myself oftentimes going, okay, here we go, sort of skipping past some of her stuff to get back to the original.
I didn't skip past it. I was determined I was going to just read it the way it was written. So I didn't skip anything, but every time it went from first century to the 50s, I was so disappointed. I couldn't wait to get back to the first century. I thought that was a much better told story.
I do as well. I mean, that was my impression. And I understand why she was trying to contextualize it in terms of the Hollywood of the day, if you will, in the 50s. I think this particular author is obsessed with that period. And I think it's become her personal passion. But I do agree with you. That's where I found myself more intrigued. I just the whole, it took me a bit to get, I bet you, Eileen, but a bit to get around to some of those first century characters. Marcus, Marsilius, Agrippa, Herodotus. I mean, some of the I had some issues with that. Maybe it's just my ADD running rampant. I couldn't keep the characters straight and how they all seem to be related. But I was in, enthralled with, engrossed by that first century story.
Absolutely. And if Hollywood is her big thing, um I didn't think the characters really came alive. So if that's her big thing, then something to me fell flat with the Hollywood characters.
I think that in my mind, maybe you guys can weigh in on this too. I felt you said flat, yeah. I felt that they were often very stereotypical in some ways. Just very stereotypical is the best word I can think of, and some of the melodrama around it and the shallowness of them seemed to be apparent. I never really got to know them other than or feel for them as I did for Salome and those characters in that part of the story. Miriam, come on, I know you have some thoughts. You always do.
You mean other than the fact that I just couldn't stand finishing this book? I found
Hated
it
it. Oh
really,
no, you never hate my books. You hate this one.
I didn't particularly like this. I found it, I did skim to the end. I found it really stilted. The whole
Ah,
thing just kind of, particularly the modern stuff. I will agree with Eileen. I really liked the um way that the author imagined first century um Judea and the life under the Roman occupation. Um, and the whole Herod, which is incredibly, they're all interconnected. So yes, the fact that no, you couldn't follow that, that's pretty normal. They were all like married to one another and they, divorced and whatever. Um, I thought that she did a pretty good job of that. What I wanted to do is pick up my copy of Josephus and read that instead, because I thought that would even give me a better view of what was happening in the first century. But at the Hollywood stuff, I just too much name dropping, kind of didn't care, too many points of view. With having 6 or 7 points of view, then cut up and having this nice one point of view. I don't know. It just lost me.
one of the things that I liked, I couldn't understand in the beginning why she chose first person for these little bit characters, right? I can't remember their names now, but the screenwriter dude,
Uh-huh.
and the secretary, and there's others. These they were but yet the main characters were always third person. So I was having some trouble with that, and then I think I figured out that the first person point of views were supposed to be current day, or at least more present, more, like sort of, later in time. I think the screenwriter ends up being 96 or something at the end of the book. So I
Right.
think that was probably one of the tools that she used.
Mhm.
And then when I went back and read some of the reviews on the story by others, a lot of folks had felt that she had used that effectively in order to gain a different perspective outside of those two major characters, Vera and Nancy. But again, in the beginning it threw me, but I guess the more I got into it, the more I
Mm.
began to understand how she was using that in order to, give us a different perspective and give us something else. But I agree with the name dropping. I couldn't keep track of it all. I was like, oh, come on, really?
I
But
didn't
what
even
drew me
hear.
to the story so much was the story that Nancy's talking about, was that first century piece of it, because I thought that was fascinating. Um,
It's a really interesting period of time. It's very tumultuous between the rise of Christianity and the idea that there could be a Messiah, and this whole period is very uh, fraught with a lot of energy, and Rome is not real happy with what's going on there, and they're very nervous about what's happening. And of course, Christianity is kind of starting to infect the Romans and the Roman armies. And of course, we still have the Greeks there. Mr. Josephus was under a Greek general. So, you know, um, it's a very complex period of time. And Josephus is really the only way we know what was happening with the Jews. We know a lot more about what was happening with the Christians, kind of from the gospel, reading the gospel.
Well, and also, I don't know about you guys, but is this the first time anyone has ever seen John the Baptist described as beautiful and handsome? I mean, everything I've read or see, he's this, rugged, dirty, even in the movies, you don't see him as being that. So seeing it, him through a different lens, I thought was interesting as well. At least in terms of how Salome saw him in this depiction. And then, like I said, the different um as you sort of said, how Rome, the influences of these different people, and not just the different cultures of Rome and Greek and the Jews, etc., but also from the leaders and their perspective, at least, those that were in power, and what was behind some of the way in which, the influences they had on different parts of the government and people's lives, and of course on the story of Christianity and how the Jews, were affected and everyone else was affected by it. So I found that fascinating. I just did, at least from her view, from her lens, and how
Mhm.
she wrote it.
Yeah, I just think she just did a better job of telling that story. That really felt whole. And it was like, I don't know why you're chopping it up into two timelines, except that that's the thing right now.
Well, I also think, though, don't you think also, and Laura, I'll get to your question in a second. She was also trying to show that character Salome in these two characters, Nancy and Vera, and she's replaying the same story, right? I mean, Jay
And
becomes the sacrificial guy, let's caught up in this trifecta of women, these two women vying for him, or at least for the same part, the same man, the same life. Very much what you saw Salome, I think, vying for in terms of trying to figure out her destiny. Those parallels, I think that the author was making with those.
hmm, well, I think it got lost on me.
It's all right.
Okay.
Laura,
I enjoyed the book. I enjoyed going back and forth. I think I'm getting used to it. As somebody said, they keep doing this,
they do.
doing different century type things. But I like the back scene of the theater, of the movies. I liked hearing about what was going on, and as usual, this beautiful, wonderful actress gets picked out of Mexico, and she gets treated like anybody else at the end. She's supposedly this god, but she may never work again. And then the scene where she gets into the scramble, I enjoyed that. But I also loved the story of Salome.
So I said Salome. How we pronounce it, gals?
Salome.
Anybody?
I don't know. I think
Neither.
it's Salome. But I also watched, let me get the date right, the 1953 movie of, it was called The Seven Veils, and it had Rita Hayworth in it, and she does the dance. And supposedly they almost cut it because it was so risque. And it really wasn't. It wasn't that risque, but I enjoyed the movie too. If anybody has the chance to see it, it was with the dark eye makeup and but
Has
I
anyone seen this scene in The Chosen? Is anybody watching has watched The Chosen at all and seen this particular scene with the instructor working with Salome over and over and over and over again to perfect the dance before she then, of course, orders for the head of John the Baptist? Has anyone watched that? Okay. The Chosen, if you haven't watched The Chosen, it's you know, I do have some problems with it when Jesus says okay a couple times. I'm going, all right. No okay and back then. All right. But anyway, there's some of those kind of things. But they do a really good job with that scene as well, Laura. I mean, I haven't seen the one you're looking. I have to go back and look at that one, but they really do it. But you don't get much personality on Salome. You just get the how she's practiced and pushed to practice and has to respond how she's under the thumb of her mother. And then when she asks for the head. And of course, John the Baptist in this particular scene is, a skinny little guy, but he looks like, the caveman on the Geico ads. He's got that sort of, wild hair and dirty and just that kind of look to him. It's not
And
exactly,
he wasn't
how
very
she is.
attractive in the movie either.
No, I was gonna say, like I said, I've never seen a John the Baptist. Even in when we were kids, we got those little books, my little child's Bible, and he's not very attractive in the children's or illustrations either from way back when. So I was kind of surprised by that particular depiction.
I don't know if she meant that he was physically beautiful as much as she could sense the beauty from the beauty that he held within himself. Because he was just kind of a wanderer through the desert kind of deal, so he would be dirty and unwashed and all of that. But I think it was just that she could see something in him. She could see a light in him that to her was beautiful.
Right. Yeah, I just got that impression from the way it was described, but you're probably right. I mean, it was more of her perspective than actual physical. But sort of struck me. It wasn't the way I expected to visualize it in the narrative. What did you guys think about Nancy's character? Anybody have some thoughts about her in particular and her, I mean, did anybody have a sympathetic bone for her? Because I've read some reviews where people thought, they were sympathetic. They did admire her. They had a lot of, feelings for her. I had none. I couldn't stand her from the very first time I was introduced to her, but perhaps I'm the only one. Anybody have anything that felt nice about Nancy at all? Jeannie's going, no. Debbie?
No, I didn't like her at all
Yeah.
from the get-go. I listened to the book,
Ooh.
which what was interesting about listening to it, there was an ensemble of characters, of voice actors. So every character that's in the book was a different actor. And it
Really?
was much easier. Yeah, because usually when I look at it and it says read by Sally Sue and she just does different voices. No, this this has maybe this is like this long. I think it was 12 or 13 voice actors. So it was a little easier to get to know the characters a little better. It was easier for me to follow when they're jumping from character to character. Um, and with any voice actor, how they sound gives you a vision in your head of how they look, how they move, how they talk. So that sort of helped me define the characters a little better, maybe in my own way. Um, it wasn't my favorite book that I've read,
Mhm.
but a lot of people didn't like the Hollywood stuff. My career was spent in film, so I was interested to see how they did that. And I did have a couple of chuckles when they're describing. I mean, I was born in the 50s, but I wasn't working in the film industry in the 50s. But I had to chuckle at some of the things that they would say or do. Even back then, it would bring up a memory. It's like, oh yeah, been there, been on set when that's happened. Yes, I've seen an actor that does that. Yes, they do that behind the scenes. So, I enjoyed that part of it. Um, the one thing that I wanted to know, and I don't know if I totally missed it, was when Jay, they talk about Jay was dead, and I thought, how there were, I didn't get a lot of discussion, about the death of him. Did anybody else, or was it just me that just all of a sudden he's deceased and
Benny shot
there,
him, right? Isn't it Betty that shot him at the end?
yeah. But it was just like, well, he's shot, he's dead. It's
Yeah.
like he was just written off so casually, and it was like, hmm, if that would have happened in Hollywood in the 50s, that would have been big news. That would have been,
And see, I
that would have
think
been
that was, I think
scandal.
that was to sort of portray, he symbolized in my mind, John the Baptist
John the
just was
Baptist, right.
was just, yeah, sacrificed for a woman for a cause of it, yeah, in the same sort of light. Although I'm not sure she quite made that connection there, but I think that's where she was going with that.
Yeah, that's what I thought too. I thought there was the parallel, but as it was going on, it was he was hardly mentioned. And maybe I just got to know him as a character better because of the actor that was portraying him. Sometimes with voices and when you're just listening, like if you go to a play and don't watch the actors on stage, you close your eyes and really listen. Or a lot for me was always because I worked with like the Broadway shows and stuff too. You're behind the stage, so you're not seeing them actually acting, but you're listening to. So it's almost like what they're doing. You kind of feel the character by their voices. So I thought they did a good job picking out whoever the voice actors were. I think they did a fair job. Sometimes you get lost when there's so many of them. And I was very intrigued when I started listening to it because I thought I've never listened to a book that had 13 or more different people reading, doing the voices. But it did help me overall get to know the characters better, if that makes any sense at all.
Yeah, it does. And I had never done that. I've never heard that either. But I will tell you on that note about Jay's death, I think now that I think back when you bringing this up, what was missing for me was that sort of, you feel someone's death when you see it through someone else's eyes, another character. And I don't think it happens so abruptly, right? We get to the end and then it's back and forth between all these different perspectives, all these different points of view, and he's shot, and you don't feel it through Vera's heart. You don't feel her loss at that. And so it probably didn't have the same impact it could have if it had been treated a little differently.
Right. I agree. I was just waiting for a little, maybe it was just a little more reaction, a little more
Right.
emotion, a little somebody to show something other than this poor guy. He's shot, he's gone, act four, it's just like it was like the hook came on stage and just grabbed him and whipped him off stage, and there was no word about him after that. So and I went back and listened again. I thought, did I fall asleep somewhere along here and I just like missed a chunk of dialogue?
Well, we don't hear from Vera again either. We don't hear from any of those major characters again after that last scene. This just goes to the perspective of, I think the screenwriter, wasn't it the screenwriter that now he's 96 and he's retelling the story and
Right.
you sort of left sort of yeah, I get that.
I almost felt like I was left hanging. I really wanted to, let's do another chapter of the scandal of Jay getting shot. What happened to the people that, but yeah, it was like boom, 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 the end.
And Nancy gets off apparently.
Yeah, I mean, it was like, how? But it was 1950s Hollywood, so it was a crazy time. I mean, it's a crazy time anytime in Hollywood, but it was crazier back then because they were all controlled by the studios, and they covered a lot of things up. So, I mean, I enjoyed it, but it wasn't my favorite book. I like your book. I liked your book much better than I like this one.
Well, thank you.
By far. But it was an interesting read, trying to with the parallels and stuff.
I knew something bad was going to happen because she was paralleling those lives too quickly. You knew that somebody was going to die.
Yeah,
I thought it was going to be Vera.
I did. Yeah, I thought for a while Vera might bite the dust.
Yeah.
Nancy might do her in.
Yes. Well, speaking of Nancy, the other Nancy, Nancy, you're up. Thanks, Debbie.
Well, first of all, to Debbie's comment about the voice actors, it was to me reminiscent of when I've listened to old radio broadcasts. The old there used to be a radio station that played those old mysteries, and I used to listen to them as a kid. So that reminded me of that. Also, to your comment about thinking you missed something, I too thought I'd fallen asleep, and I replayed it because I thought I'd missed something. So you're not the only one. But the thing that I was kind of missing, and maybe I did sleep through this, I thought she was going to make a bigger point of the Hispanic character actress or actors, uh, the role, excuse me, um, the roles, how they normally weren't given certain roles. And I thought she was going to make that into a bigger thing. And I didn't, I kind of felt like it got dropped. Did, did anyone else, did I miss something there? Again, did I fall asleep? Thank you.
No, I don't, I mean, does anybody have any thoughts on that? I mean, I thought she just sort of let Vera sort of peter out, right? I mean, she was built up and then she just sort of crashed. I don't think she did. Anybody have any thoughts on that? I mean, I feel there's a lot of melodrama around some of that in my mind. I'm looking at my notes here if I have anything here. Um, I don't think I do. How'd this get involved with here? No, I mean, I don't have any thoughts on that in particular. Um, I guess the character that I guess it was my notes. Joe Cantor, he's that screenwriter. He seemed to have a big voice. I guess he's the one that sort of brought the thing to the end. Am I right? He's the right guy. He sort of opens the book, and then interjects a couple times and then closes the book. But there was no real, in my mind, sort of closing on that Mexican sort of theme there of the actress that I could see. I guess the one thing I also had trouble with is I couldn't understand the title or the cover. Just out of, but what I mean, my husband looked at this and he says, just so he goes, I can't believe you picked this book. What is it, like one of those romances that you buy at the grocery store? Because he saw the cover. And I go, well, the cover's got nothing to do. I mean, I don't get how the cover relates to the story. Does anyone have any thoughts on that in particular? I mean, she's not even dressed in the I don't get the cover. And I was interesting. You guys, I don't know if you know Jane Reed on social media, but every time I would post something up about this book, she goes, I hate that cover. I mean, she's not on the phone. But anybody have any thoughts on how this cover works? Does it work for you? Or would you guys pick it up? It doesn't seem to me to relate at all to the story. Just curious if anyone had thoughts on it. And the same with the title. I don't quite understand the title. I guess the last veil was, when she orders and she wins the dance and she's pleasing everybody, but I didn't like the cover. And I think I would have picked something. Sorry?
I didn't, yeah, sorry, Sharon. I didn't like the cover either. Again, it looked, I have to agree with you. It looked like it should be on the shelf next to the guy with the long hair and his hair is blowing and his shirt's open and he's, got a six-pack, he's all built and all this kind of stuff. So I would never have picked it up just because of how it looked.
Yeah, and the reason I read it in the first place is because we read Mexican Gothic, which was a little different than some of the most of the other books that we read at that particular point in time. And I liked it because she has a way of writing that's rich. Her in my mind, her tapestry is really tight in terms of the way she can weave the visual of a story. You can see the scenes in my mind. She does a really good job with that. She's written, I guess you would refer to as the Mexican Gothic as a bit of that sort of fantasy kind of thing. This was not that at all, but she could really visualize the scenes. And I had the same, experience here. I could see old Hollywood. I mean, not that I lived in old Hollywood, but it's how I would have imagined it. It was pretty rich that way. But the name dropping I found a bit distracting. Because I don't know half these actors, and some of them I do know, and I was going, okay, a lot of Rita Hayworth and stuff, and it just felt like it was a little overbaked, a little overdone, from my view. But then again, I was really not reading it for the Hollywood story as much as I found myself reading it for the first century story. And that's, I mean, I'm like Eileen, I would have liked to have seen more of that. I felt more related, it felt more relatable. And I didn't like some of that over sexualization that I think was going on really early on in the story. I thought it was a bit off-putting. And I did think it dragged a bit, but then, like I said, toward the end, it really picked up and it really moved. That last quarter of the book, in my mind, is where it really all sort of came together. And I go, okay, I know where this is going, and I knew it was going to be a tragedy and an ugly one. And I was right. And sometimes it's nice to read a tragedy, not where everybody goes home happily forever after. But I did feel a bit like Vera just sort of faded off into the sunset, but not even that. She just disappeared. She was just gone. Jay dies. The future looks like it's going to be bright. Jay dies, and then she just disappears. And we really don't hear from her again. And I found that a little disappointing, but I thought it was a good read. Any other comments we want to make about this? Because it's an intriguing story. The Salome part in particular. Has anybody else read anything else about the Salome story other than any of the, any other films that you've watched or that depictions you've read, and how this was different from that? Has anybody had any other experience with it? I think Nancy, you said you'd gone back and watched, or Laura, you'd gone back and watched a film. How different was it from the depiction here?
The at the end they killed her. And I don't know if the story in the Bible goes into any of the details at all. But after she dances, the plate, they go down and they bring up his head. And she takes one of the veils and covers herself. And she comes out and she says, I have kissed my one love of my life. And her stepfather says, kill her. So that's
Nasty.
how they did it in the movie.
There's none of that
more
in Matthew,
dramatic.
as I recall. It's Matthew, I believe this is where it's written. Isn't it Matthew? Who's my Bible person? Anybody? I'm pretty sure it's Matthew, the book of Matthew.
But of
But no,
course,
Laura,
from
there's
what
not,
I
there's not a whole
believe
lot there about her.
is that the dance she did for her stepfather means that her stepfather now owned her.
Yeah,
And I didn't get that from the book.
no, I didn't either from what I had read about it. It was just, she was pleasing her mother. And I think in the Bible as well. I'll have to look at that and find out which exact verse it is and go back and read again. I'm pretty sure it's Matthew.
But
I'm gonna see
wasn't
if I
that
have it in my notes.
how he married her mother? The mother did the dance first,
Yes.
and then he married her. So it was kind of it was almost like the dance was, I don't know, almost like a seduction or an engagement process. So
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
It would have made sense that after the daughter did the dance, that he was going to have to sleep with the daughter.
And maybe it is just sleeping. Maybe it isn't even
Well,
marriage. Maybe it's just possession.
maybe.
Right, they were
Well,
pretty.
the daughter would have become his mistress then. His
He
her
was still married.
stepfather's mistress. Yeah, but she would have been his mistress. So she would have been mistress to her stepfather. It would have been complicated.
Well, back then it wasn't I think that's kind of the way they were back then, Eileen. I think they were non-discretionary on. I mean, it was pretty pretty sick by our standards of today. Well, what about Vera?
Matthew 27:5-1.
There you go. Matthew 27:5-1. I know it's Matthew. Okay. I will look that later. Dawn had made a comment as well in the chat. Where are you, Dawn? Here, let me see what you're saying. About you didn't like the book, I see, but no, you made a comment about something earlier. Oh, that you thought Nancy had a mental disorder of some sort. I thought she was just a self-absorbed narcissist, but maybe she had more going on with her than
I
that.
think she was a typical wrapped up, went to California to be a movie star and didn't make it.
Yeah. And she was evil, I thought, just and very, like I said, used people. I just didn't like her at all. And I felt sorry for Vera in a lot of ways. The situation with her mother, the situation with her sister. I can kind of see that. And there's a lot of that goes on in those Hollywood families. But even though they were from Mexico, but I had more sympathy for her. And Jay, I felt was just naive in a lot of ways as well. Um, but like you said, I think Lee made a good point. A bit shallow in some of the characters, but it was the first century that I found so intriguing. Yeah, and I see Don's comment too about the characters getting mixed up, particularly in that first century bit. I had to write them down because I kept getting Marcus or Marcellus mixed up, and who's the cousin and who's the suitor, and and the territories, and I don't know a lot of the Judea provinces back from that perspective, so. You needed like one of those Bible road maps of what countries are today versus then, so you keep track. But I did find that part of the story fascinating. As you remember, a couple of years ago, we read what was the name of the book? The Book of Longings, which was set in that same time period. And who wrote that? I can't remember who was, but it was quite good. Uh, and I didn't have as much trouble with it back then with that version as I do now. Any other comments today? It's not so much fun when you have the author on.
Yeah. The only thing I would say too is, is that I thought that I didn't like Nancy either. However, I do think that a lot of her issues stem from childhood because she was always referencing back to pleasing her dad, and she could never ever get to the point where she felt she got his approval. And I do think that probably played into some of her personality as well.
Yeah, right. And there was something else about her too that I can't remember now. It's been so long. But back to her childhood, what was it? That she had high expectations or something, and then she was part of the crowd, but not part of the crowd. That sort of, outsider, insider, outsider thing. Um, Pretty girl, but there were a lot of pretty girls back then. Yeah, daddy issues. A lot of daddy issues. Um, and I guess Jay had mother issues as well too. As so did a lot of parental issues in these kids. I mean, a lot of these, characters. Overbearing mothers, daddy issues you can't do well enough. That seemed to be an overarching theme, both in the Hollywood story and if you think about it, in the first century story with Salome's father, being someone that she looked up to, and then he's basically been banished and exiled from her life. You see some of that as well. Psychology of the characters played a role. Anybody else have any comments? Connie, Terry, anybody? Nope.
Do you know there was also an opera?
Really?
Yes.
Yeah, they talk about that in the book.
Yeah,
that
it was an opera.
there were two operas, plays, Flaubert and somebody else. I mean, that there were pieces and parts that sounded interesting, but it just never, it didn't hold my
click for you.
attention enough to finish it.
Okay. Well, then you missed
Wow,
the
that
you missed
never
the
happens, Miriam. Wow.
the quick ending. Boom, boom, boom. See it coming though. That's the thing I don't like. I don't like when you can see it coming. I don't want to see it coming.
Well, yeah, I think for me, the problem was it was just so chopped up. And there was all of a sudden, it would just end, and then it would be another person, all in these little chopped up pieces. And I found that as much as I read lots and lots of stuff, I found that really difficult. By the way, I did look at the audiobook review, and the reviewer liked it, not enough to give it an award, but the reviewer liked it, and there is a podcast about it. So, for those of you who don't know, I review for an organization called Audiophile Magazine, and they post reviews of performances of audiobooks. and the narrators. And then they have a podcast called Behind the Mic. And that happened to come up as an episode. So they obviously talked about it a little bit too. And the review seemed to, the reviewer liked it and liked the multicast, the multi-voice cast.
Well, that does sound interesting. I don't think I've ever listened to one that's been, when you said
More than
13.
two, more than four. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I didn't look to see who the publisher was, but they must have decided that's an
Penguin,
editorial
isn't it?
decision.
Oh, I mean, oh, maybe in the audio, I don't know.
Yeah.
I think it was Penguin.
To have multiple voices. And every once in a while, the big publishers will do multi voices, and it could be a subsidiary of Penguin.
I thought so, but I could be wrong. I've got somebody on my desk right now. I can't keep track of them all. I've got a bunch of arcs in recently, so.
Anyway, and I looked at the
Yes,
Book of
Penguin.
Longings. Yeah, I like that. That was the one where there was the imagined that Jesus had a wife. That
Yeah,
was
Book of
really
Longings.
interesting. Yeah, that was very interesting.
That one I liked.
I like that one too. So what are we reading next, Sharon?
So it's a shorter book. It's by Taylor Brown. I've been back and forth whether or not to include it. I read it a while ago as well. I'm going to read it again, or at least go through it again. It's Rednecks, and I like the topic. It's about the miner strikes and the miner wars, if you will, in West Virginia, I guess in the 30s. And the conditions of the mine. It's a short book. It reminds me a bit of a Colson Whitehead kind of book where it's not terribly long, but it's intense. And it's on a topic that I have family that had worked in the mines in that time period in West Virginia, so I was fascinated by that story. His writing's a little different, I'm just going to tell you. But I've been trying to get him. I know his agent, but she's not gotten back to me. Of course, it's Christmas. But that's the next book. It's Taylor Brown's Rednecks, and it's not the rednecks have to do with the bandanas that they would wear over their face, while they were in the mines. That was their mine gear to keep from getting black lung. It's just a cotton cloth over your mouth. And they also used it, to hide their faces during some of the protests and the riots and the what do we call it? Riots, the labor strikes that happened in that time period. The book following that, I picked one for Black History Month, Sadika Johnson. We read her before. This one is The House of Eve. And I am going to do, and I know that what's her face is not on tonight. Janet's not on, but she had recommended the Tyran, the Ladies of Tyran. I can't remember Tyran, the last ladies. What was it called? The Tyran book. And then I've got four more I'm looking through now for April, May, and June. That I'm reading through.
Sharon, I thought we were doing The Housekeeper's Secret.
We have that on the list. It's just not, I haven't read it yet, Eileen. I want to read it first.
Really good.
Is it good? Yeah, it's
Yeah.
funny with the reviews. Sometimes Goodreads gives terrible reviews. I don't get it. I think it had a 3.8 or something, but it's on the list. So the books I have on the list. One is the new one by Fiona Davis. It's not out yet. Or maybe it just came out. And then there's one by Paulette Kennedy that I have that's not coming out yet. The Housekeeper's Secret's on the list, and Murderous. It's about a serial killer in Los Angeles, I think in the 20s, based on a true story. So those are the four I have left to read. I got a stack like this big downstairs of books to get through.
I heard The Murderers was very good. The book you're looking for, Sharon, is called The Lion Women of Tehran.
That's it. Yeah, that's the one Janet recommended. And I had that scheduled for March. I'm going to try to get hold of the author as
Oh, that
well.
should be interesting. Before the
Yeah.
fall of the Shah.
Yeah.
Hmm.
So those are the ones I've got lined up. Rednecks is next with Taylor Brown. And then the Sadika Johnson, I wanted to do a Black author for February. And I looked at Colson Whitehead's new book, and I also looked at Gail Jones's book, and I read both of them, and they're just not what I don't think you guys would be happy with them. So The Unicorn Woman, I read that and I was like, okay, no. I got halfway through it and I said, It was great in the beginning. It started off okay, and then it gets really weird, and I think you'd like it. So,
Okay.
and if you guys have some suggestions, please
Okay.
bring them forward. Like I said, I have a number lined up, but I have got nothing really after June at this point. And I'm sure of the four I've got yet let's read, one of them will fall off. It's the way it always works. I have a feeling I know which one it's going to be.
I put the link to the Audiophile magazine review in the chat. So if people want to look at the review, and then below the review, there's a link to the podcast. So
Let me
if you
look.
click on that, it's there. You can search for
Okay.
it. And thank you to Terry for finding the info about Herod and Son.